Hi, I'm Sandy Max. In 2014, the Arts page told you about Stitching History from the Holocaust, a traveling exhibit created by the Jewish Museum of Milwaukee and the Milwaukee Repertory Theater. In 1939, Milwaukee was a beacon of hope for Paul and Hetty Strnad. The Strnads lived in Prague, Czechoslovakia. They knew they were in a dangerous place and were eager to leave Europe. Tragically, they died in the Holocaust. Their personal story would have never been known if it wasn't for the discovery of a misplaced letter with a handful of dress designs in a basement in a house in Bayview. This story starts with one handwritten letter.
December 11th, 1939. Dear Elvin, I received your last letter and thank you very much for your kind care. I was very glad to hear that you are troubling to get an affidavit of necessity for my wife as a dress designer. Would you be so kind as to let me know if you have any success in this matter? You may imagine that we have a great interest of leaving Europe as soon as possible because there is no possibility of getting a position in this country. By separate mail, I have sent you some dress designs my wife made. I hope the dress manufacturer you mentioned in your letter will like them. Hoping to hear very soon from you, I remain with kind regards to you and your wife and with the best wishes for the new year. Yours sincerely, Paul.
The Holocaust happened to real people, and that the loss of talent becomes apparent when something is recreated or created from something that is lost.
Stitching History from the Holocaust is really a look at two different things. It's a very individual look at a specific couple and a specific family, but on a much larger scale, it addresses the huge void of talent, the loss of contributions to the world that were never able to be brought to fruition because of everyone that perished in the Holocaust and all of the hopes and dreams that perished along with them.
This exhibit takes 8 dress designs that were sent to Milwaukee in 1939 from a couple in Prague, Hedwig Strnad and her husband Paul, to a Milwaukee cousin in the hopes of getting immigration visas.
We knew we had something very extraordinary because the sketches were beautiful and the letter was poignant.
The letters have been in the collection of the museum since before it was a museum. They were given to the Milwaukee Jewish Archives in 1997 by Burton Strnad, who was cleaning out his mother's basement and found them. He had no idea that his father had had this correspondence. His father is Alvin, who is the recipient of these letters.
And within the envelope was a red envelope, and within the red envelope were 8 dress designs, a picture of the woman and her husband, and a letter to Bert Strnad's father. And in that letter, they were seeking help in coming to America to escape the Nazis in Prague.
Paul Strnad in Prague knew that Alvin was trying to help him come to America with his wife, and he enclosed these sketches in the hopes that that would convince people in the United States that they would not be a burden on the economy.
Burton Strnad turned them over to the archives, never knowing, would they be on display. He just knew that they would be preserved.
The sketches were an indication of talent that was lost.
And when the museum was installed in 2008, it became a focal point of our Holocaust section.
Well, one of our visitors came in, and when she came to this section, she said, oh my God, and the story is so poignant. And she said, there's so much you could do with the dresses. I said, like what? She said, oh, make them.
From the first letter, we did not even know Paul's wife's name.
It started as this very slow process of trying to figure out who this woman was, because in the letter itself, it just says, my wife is a very talented dressmaker. So we went to the Yad Vashem names database and we researched Paul Strnad. And in researching Paul Strnad from Prague, we found a list of people. And then we triangulated out from there that one Paul Strnad is married to a woman listed in the Yad Vashem names database as Hedvika Strnad, and her occupation was listed as Lady Tailor. And there is a niece who is listed at the bottom as the person who submitted this page of testimony. So we then kind of constitute our research efforts on finding the family through the names database, but also in looking for that niece who is living in the early 1990s when she submitted this page of testimony.
Paul's nieces, Lieselot and Brigitte Neumann, his sister's 2 children, they went on the last Kindertransport that left Prague, and they are alive. And we could not find them, and we tried for 2 years to find them. And quite by chance, we have a young student at Lawrence University who was doing an internship at the Berlin Jewish Museum, and we sort of tossed off the idea that maybe he could look yet one more time. Could he look one more time for Brigitte? And in the space of a couple of days, he found her, and we sent him to interview her, and we made contact. We learned more about Hedwig as well. We found out her name. We thought her name was Hedvika, which it was in Czech, but that was how she was identified on all of the concentration camp records. But the family spoke German. So she was known as Hedwig or Hetty. And that changed again how we thought about her.
The other things we learned is that she had red hair, which, you know, when you have black and white photos, being able to have that one kind of visual detail gives you a sense of this is who this woman was, that she was a redhead, and that she owned her own studio. Brigitte's 9-year-old memory, you know, that she was 9 when she left Czechoslovakia on Kindertransport, was able to recall going to her aunt's studio and having her people who worked there create doll clothes from puppets for her. And that, you know, gave us this whole new sense of who these people were and what they did.
The exhibit was kind of built out of this 1939 letter, which we knew from the envelope that it arrived in and was stamped with Nazi signage or Nazi symbolism, that it was a letter that was censored. And so the language, it's not as urgent as you would expect a family putting out a plea for help to have been.
We found another letter that came 1 year before the initial letter that we have. The first letter we have is from December 1939, which is after World War II started. The other letter is October 1938. And what makes the difference is that without the censorship, Paul Sternad, the one in Prague, is reacting emotionally and openly without censorship to the sense of betrayal he feels when the Munich Pact has been signed, and he feels that the Allies have betrayed his country and given away pieces of Czechoslovakia, the area called the Sudetenland.
Even now, strong anti-Semitic tendencies are making themselves felt. Such tendencies has never even existed before in this country. These tendencies will probably not be able to be kept in bounds, and one may even presume that they will spread all over Europe. Nothing will remain, therefore, to do but to adapt oneself to the circumstances and to consider emigrating from Europe.
He is fearful that all of Czechoslovakia will be taken over by the Nazis, which turned out to be true, that anti-Semitism will overwhelm Europe, which turned out to be true, and that he and his family must leave Europe or their lives will be in danger, which also turned out to be unfortunately true.
I am writing, therefore, to ask you whether there is a possibility of emigrating to the USA, where I and my wife might find some occupation. My wife is 39, and for the last 17 years has been running as proprietress a first-class dressmaking establishment. She has a number of work people and enjoys a very good reputation in Prague, as she is very diligent, has a first-class knowledge of her line, and has very good taste.
Our director, Kathy Bernstein, approached the Milwaukee Repertory Theater and spoke with the costume department.
Our shop manager from last season was contacted by the museum about this project, and after she saw the drawings, she was so excited about the project that she said, "We're in." There are coats, there's suits, there's dresses, there's a formal dress. I don't think they were all part of one collection, although we are showing them as one collection. When you see the colors, it's really surprising to know that here's a person that was in Czechoslovakia during the Holocaust, and we have these really brightly colored dresses.
So we received copies of the renderings, and then as project manager on this, I did a bunch of research into the period fashions, using period catalogs, magazines.
We gather all of our research, and then it's time to create patterns. We take fabric, cheap muslin, and we actually drape it on the form to create the patterns. We then cut out the pattern out of an inexpensive fabric. We make a mock-up of the fabric so that we can correct all the problems in the pattern without having to cut it into the real fabric.
The draper hands off the patterns to us once they're ready, and we cut out the fabric, and then we hand off the fabric pieces, the garment pieces, to the stitchers to assemble them.
All the dresses are made of natural fibers and fabrics that we would have found in the time period, in the 30s. The only synthetic that I can think that we are using is the thread that holds them together. But Jessica has tried very, very hard to be as faithful to the period as we can.
3 of the looks have printed fabrics in them, and we obviously couldn't source those exact prints, so we had to find somebody to create them.
Margaret Hassett Guy has recreated the prints that Hedwig drew in her drawings. What's really unique about these is you can see the direct correlation between the surrealist movement in art and the prints. And Margaret went beyond Hedwig's designs, and she did research on her own and researched textiles of the period and art of the period, and really brought an authenticity to it.
There is no place that was better outfitted than the Milwaukee Reps costume shop to do this. There are people who understand historical research with clothing. There are people who understand how to develop a design and to take it through a whole schematic and go through these things. And they were able to bring this level of professionalism that I don't think any of us entirely accounted for. They also pointed out the challenges very quickly about making the dresses. We thought this was such an easy part of the exhibit that our research part was going to be so much more challenging.
They were given these two-dimensional paintings or drawings that you couldn't see what the back was. There was no indication of what the fabrics were. There was no indication of, if a dark spot was a shadow, or is it a fold, is it a pleat?
So everything that you see on display here is a work of interpretation by the Milwaukee Repertory Theater's costume department. After we got this interview with Brigitte, she sent us in a couple months later a letter. And it's very eerie when you get a letter and it has the exact same handwriting as a letter that is from someone who has been deceased for a very long time. And it's the exact same handwriting. It was in German, and it was from Paul Stranad to his brother-in-law, Ernst. There's a short note at the bottom that says, "Love to your children, signed Hetty." We took that signature and we had it cleaned up. The rep actually designed a label looking at what other historic fashion house labels of that time. And so it says Hetty Original, which is kind of the sense that these are Hetty Originals. Each one of the garments is finished with that label, and it does make it feel a little bit like she's put her stamp of approval on these garments.
To really demonstrate that this was, these were her designs and her dreams, that was kind of the perfect finishing detail.
We are in awe of the care that they took, and they fell in love with the story.
It wasn't enough to just copy. They wanted to be faithful to Hetty's designs.
They imbued it with such love and devotion. The work ethic is impeccable, and it really exceeded all of our expectations in terms of bringing this collection to life. And now we have this series of ensembles that are part of a larger story.
We know that Alvin submitted immigration documents for them, and we know that they weren't able to escape.
We found out, first of all, that Paul and Hedwig, along with all of Paul's family, were all transported to the concentration camp called Theresienstadt. And we found out, as we did more and more research, that most Czech Jews went to Theresienstadt, and that the story of the Holocaust in Czechoslovakia is a little bit different than the history of the Jews of the rest of Europe.
Paul and Hetty are deported to Theresienstadt in 1942. Theresienstadt was the major transit camp for all Czech Jews. There were a number of artists and leaders, and in fact, German intellectuals were often sent to Theresienstadt as kind of a first point before they were sent further east, because this is a way of saying, no, we've just resettled them here. So there was this cultural life that existed at Theresienstadt. We know that both Paul and Hedwig were transported from Theresienstadt to Warsaw, and that's where we lose them.
We don't know the exact circumstances surrounding their death, but we do know that they perished in the Holocaust.
Since opening in 2014, the Stitching History from the Holocaust exhibit has traveled around the United States. The exhibit shows Hetty's dress designs and continues to communicate the historical importance of the Strnad's tragic experience. The Stitching History from the Holocaust exhibit opens September 30th.